Right, I was going to talk about some of the world issues, but given the time, we're going to focus on Australia. I think it's an interesting story for most. Thank you, everyone, for your hospitality. It's been great. Australia could use your contribution to the economy, though. So come over to Australia. We'll say hello. Got to get our revenue growing. So the dollar's pretty good at the moment, 75 cents to the US dollar. Great Barrier Reef. Think about all those things. Okay, so I'm going to pretty much skip this first slide, but there's a couple of things I want to pick off it. 1.3 billion people without energy at the moment, and that's certainly something that I was working on before I left Ergon. We were working with companies from the Philippines, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, those sorts of locations, some discussions about India and those areas about how we get electricity to them. There's a lot of things obviously driving the market worldwide. They're some of the themes that in my mind, is impacting our industry. But I'm going to focus on Australia, and that's the ugly for us. That's what that is a graph on retail prices on every state. So you can see across every state in Australia, once you get to about 2007, 8, 9, the retail prices escalating quite significantly, nearly 100%. In a short period of time. And so what caused that? Does anyone remember Kevin Rudd? I can understand if you don't, because we turn over a lot of Prime Ministers. It's pretty hard to catch up or keep up. So Kevin Rudd came in it's called Kevin 07. He came in and he was very focused on climate change, wanted to introduce emissions trading scheme, and eventually what happened is a carbon tax came in 2012. But what was happening in the industry was at that same time in the last decade, we had a mining boom. We had sea change occurring, we had record immigration, the middle Australia was continuing to grow, the wealth, there was more appliances going in. There was a big storm particularly in Queensland in 2004 that resulted in rolling blackouts in Energex's area. So the government introduced new standards. So increased demand, increased connections, increased standards resulted in significant investment in capital over that period of time. Then we had the global financial crisis in 2008. We call it the GFC, you call it something else. And that pushed up the weighted average cost of capital. So we had a couple of things going together. Investment, higher capital, and carbon coming in. So what you see is that last graph with the prices going up over that period of time. So where are we going now? Sorry, point that the right way. At a federal government level, the target's been set out to 2030, which is 28% of renewables. One of the problems at the time when the federal government got in was they actually very much focused on the supply side. Now, from my perspective, the most efficient way to deal with energy issues is initially on the demand side. The cheapest kilowatt is the kilowatt I don't use. And what's good for my customers, particularly commercial industrials, is I get their prices down so they can compete. You can imagine what was happening when the prices went up. As per that last slide, customer outrage occurred, and we now have a very aggressive regulator trying to push the prices down, as are the utilities. So the federal government's got their 25, 28% by 2030. They've got a renewable energy target of 33,000 gigawatt hours by 2020. And thankfully now we have a energy productivity target. It's all about gross domestic product, those sorts of things. And that's 40% by 2030. That's a Conservative government in the blue on that side. This is the state government on the right side, looking for 1 million PVs on roofs. We're just over 400,000 at the moment. We've got 1.4 gigawatt hours of solar on roofs. We don't have a lot of utility scale. Why? Because the small scale crowded the utility scale out in terms of investment. It's also crowding batteries out because I'm getting higher feed-in tariffs from the initial feed-in tariffs that the government set at 44 cents. We convinced the government to move away from the 1 million PVs on roofs and put in a target of 3,000 megawatts. So that gave us some some latitude. I was actually trying to convince the government to make it a carbon target, because then we can bring in energy efficiency, demand management, all those sorts of things to achieve a carbon outcome, because that's what the original objective was all about. But carbon became such a dirty word in Australia that no politician would put that in any policy. We lost prime ministers because of it, etc. In terms of the solar feed-in tariff, there's a review on that. The current government, it is 6.5 cents, or about 6.3 cents, and the government's policy is to look at a fair and reasonable feed-in tariff. I was quite happy last week when the Queensland Productivity Commission put out their draft report and pretty much said that that tariff at 6.5 cents is fair and reasonable. It's the cost of energy in the wholesale market plus losses. And it changes people's behaviour. So this is where we're going forward. This is the Energy Networks Association view on costs. Different scenarios, but just in short, that top graph there shows network prices pretty well flat over the next, out to 2050, and that's because of the way we use those distributed energy resources, because of the smart grid sort of technology, the tariff restructures, etc. The bottom graph is energy prices. Okay, so Australia has a high percentage of coal out there at the moment, and we're putting in more and more renewables. We have no nuclear. We've got a lot of gas, but the gas market is particularly linked to the international market, so that holds prices high. So we have all this coal, and pretty much from a political policy perspective, we're trying to move off it. And that's where the 28% target comes from. Now, I think you've probably heard over the period that about the value shift, and this is what we've seen for years. That slide was done back in 07, 08. I produced that slide. I said there would be a value shift into the customers from generation down through the network, and customers would become empowered. In fact, we had a strategic objective by 2020, our customers would be empowered, the price would go up, there would be headroom, technology would come in, and the customer would have more choice. So that's exactly what's happened. In Queensland, as I said, about a bit over 400,000 solar on roof as people try to escape the price. They're price sensitive. And a lot of people are there actually to make money. Sorry. This is a bit of an indication of, you know, how we've used technology, therefore, to respond to those cost increases. My argument is that you don't have to actually increase costs over the period of time if you have an orderly transition. If you use technology efficiently, if you use tariffs the right way, you can hold costs down. Now that's Ergon Energy on the bottom. That's a cost index on our OPEX costs. All those other lines are every other distributor in Australia. And we've been able to hold our costs down on that zero index for that period. Not just because of demand management and energy management, it was also the spatial technology we put in, roams. That allowed us to take our vegetation costs down from over 100 mil down to 60 mil. It allowed me to respond to cyclones or your hurricanes in a much quicker period of time. What is it? It's spatial intelligence that lets me see the whole world in 3D, the environment, the trees, all of those sorts of things. We're able to use that to bring our costs down, improve safety, better risk manage, and increase the reliability of the network and deliver better customer service. So that's how technology has helped. I want to just focus on the energy side of it a little bit. That is Queensland's patch there, Ergon's patch. It's everything other than that southeast corner. The other CEO who runs that's called Terry Effany. He and I are good friends. I used to say to people, we gave Terry 3% of the state while we looked after the rest, just so he couldn't get in too much trouble. I think I probably got in more trouble. There's a lot more politics in the state there because of local councils and those sorts of things. But this slide is trying to say those bubbles there are actually the orange is where the solar is. The size represents how much is in there. You've got some green, you've got some blue, gas, sugar, biofuels, those sorts of things. In Ergon's case, we had 2.4 gigawatts peak. We had a 1 gigawatt of distributed energy there. And my challenge to the business was use that resource because you're not using it effectively. We also had 700 megawatts of load under control. but we were using old technology, audio frequency load control, switching at the same time at night, no messaging to customer. Replace it with LoRa technology, put wireless in, communicate with your customers, get value out of it, so we don't have to invest so much in the network. 29% of detached houses in Queensland have solar on the roofs, the highest in the world. We've had to, that wasn't based on our policies, it was based on government policies, etc., but we had to enable it, make it happen. We had to change standards on the inverters, we changed the voltage standards, we put static bar compensators in. So our people started to work on this issue in a different way to make it an opportunity. And this talk shows you some of the impacts on what's happened. This is the latest retail outcomes in Queensland, business, residential customers. What you can see there is the businesses that we were running, which was distribution and retail, the network and retail, the costs went down in that period. A solar cost's gone up for a residential customer, it's $20 because those who don't have solar are subsidising those that do. It's not coming off government balance sheets, it's coming from the customers. Green energy scheme costs go up. I'm saying that you can do all that. You can have that, but you've got to have those arrows going in those directions. How do I bring my network costs down? How do I bring the customer value proposition up? How do I get a cleaner, more secure future without impacting the economy? This is an interesting one, and if I showed you Energex, those lines would cross. Okay, so those lines are people with solar, people without. The top line is people without solar, the bottom line is people with. So in Energex's patch, right at this moment, people with solar use more energy off the grid than people without. And everyone gets amazed about that stat, but it's true. People with solar tend to, after they've made the investment several years ago, start changing their quality of life and living. They'll run more air conditioning and appliances, and they'll go back with the elasticity of energy prices back to probably what they paid before. So it's an interesting fact. And of course, they use more of the grid. I'll just go to this slide. The blue there is a 44-cent feed-in tariff. In 2012, as I said, it changed to a 6.5-cent feed-in tariff. And you can see it did have some impact, but it just slowed it down, okay? So you get to the future you asked for. We are getting, obviously, people putting bigger installations in. Even though it's only 6.5-cent feed-in, they're heading up towards the 4.5 to 5. And when you can see you get to that level, 74% of the energy is going back into the grid. So there's some issues there in terms of what our installers are doing in terms of promoting an efficient size. We have something, or Ergon has something like 30 to 40 feeders feeding back into the grid, creating the duct curve. Our peak continues, though, to maintain at that level because the 44-cent customers tend to want to export as much as they can and put their load into night. So that's holding the peak. We're trying to get them to translate or buy out potentially the 44 cents, put them back on the 6.5, and then you get that sort of outcome where you get they consume more. So those two pie graphs show you some different sort of behaviours. We had 26,000 customers who don't pay a cent. Here you have a net metering tariff where you generally get back what you buy it for, whether it's 20 cents or 30 cents. There, when it's 44 cents, the net cost of energy going in is generally around 21. So they're getting about double back. So in that case, you've got about 26,000 people actually get a cheque. This is quickly what our fuel mix is. There's no nuclear in there. There's very little hydros. We don't have enough mountains. The mountains we do have are very pretty, so come and see them. When you see the barrier reef, there's some great lakes and all those sorts of things, and there's a big desert sort of area in the middle, which has also got some really nice attributes, so come and see that as well. Second last slide, this gives you an indication on where the price is. So in America at the moment, your average price is around $3.7 per kilowatt, per watt I should say. Australia is down around 1.6. That's typically because it's such a large and fluid industry at this point in time. There are still some credits on the renewable energy certificates. we have less restrictions in terms of people putting these things on houses, and therefore we've got a cost differential, and that's why you see solar still growing very rapidly. So to close off, I think one of the things I put forward in Australia very much focused initially in 07, 08 on carbon and carbon only, and it had some perverse outcomes. We now have a lot of resources out there that we've got to effectively utilise, and what I'd like to see is getting electricity to all, reducing carbon, cleaner energy resources, resilience to climate change, productivity of both the energy and the asset, affordability, lifestyle, social equity, employment, and grow the economy. You know, if we can get that sort of balanced scorecard right, then we can push the country forward. And I'm starting to see across government, regulators, the industry, the clean tech companies, more cooperation today than I've seen in the past. So look, that's a brief story about Australia, where we are, how we got to where we are and where we're going. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ian. What an honor. It's a real privilege to have you with us. You know, one question, assets, before we let everyone go. So how would you recommend some of our American utilities look at this really sort of big issue of stranded assets when we start talking about a distributed utility, or we start talking about these new platform economics, all those real investments year over year? You're really touching on some stuff. What are some of your top 2 or top 3 recommendations on addressing sort of that dynamic?
Well, I think, you know, what we're doing, the value position has moved. So we're not just there now to be the transport company of energy. So the purpose, and this is with your people, it's very important. What's your purpose today? It's a much higher level purpose. The grid is there to enable the cleaner future, the secure future, the reliable future. The grid is there to provide a number of enhanced services, lifestyle services for the customer. So getting that across increases the actual value of the grid. And I'm not talking trying to take up the capital value of the grid. I think you grow in those unregulated sort of services. So what we were doing was growing the unregulated services while the network side of the business, we had to hold it down. Otherwise it was going to be unsustainable. And that's why we put technology in, such as demand management, energy conservation. We restructured tariffs. We're getting more smart meters out there, more sensors. The roams technology in terms of the spatial 3D world. All those things are helping us keep network costs down, but leverage all those technologies to grow unregulated revenues.
Well, everyone, Ian McLeod, you can see why he won an award. We are very excited to have him here. Thank you so much.
Anyone who wants to get a ticket to Australia, I've got a line into Qantas. I can organise it now.